1950s column from the Courier Mail, Brisbane, titled Climate Change, The World is Warming, briefly details the fact and concern that the world is warming. This article was written in a time where climate change was not discussed or known by the general public. However, was starting to grow and as a recognized process and subsequently a problem within the scientific community. Evident by Professor Drew Goldie, who writes, "Since the 1950s, climate science has expanded and refined into a new profession, which has established certainty about global climate shocks. This new knowledge, along with the lack of understanding about climate change in 1950, highlights the intent of the article as it was used to popularize the theory of climate change and explain the possible effects to the citizens of Brisbane. This intent is further evident by the fact that it is a brief column in the Courier Mail rather than something like an academic paper or government document. The simplicity of the message and lack of extensive numerical evidence allows it to be digestible for the average reader, with only some stats such as the Arctic Ocean has risen about an inch in the last 80 years due to the sun melting the icebergs. Additionally, even though we do not know who wrote this article, the use of the paraphrasing of A.R. Penfold, the director of the Museum of Technology and Applied Science, legitimizes the author, whilst also not going into great academic depth in order to keep the column light for the audiences to read, which in turn allows the people to be familiarized with the concept of climate change and thus take it seriously. Today, climate change has become more prominent in society, with extensive research being done about the effects and solutions to the issue. This has correlated to a more in-depth coverage and analysis of global warming within newspaper and mainstream media. Thus, both this Courier Mail article and today's media reflects the knowledge about, concern with, and prominence of climate change in their respective societies, thus showing how our understanding of climate change has evolved over 70 years. However, this article fails to highlight the severity of climate change in 1950 due to the lack of key tracking data in the 1950s. The systematic measurement of permafrost began in earnest around 1950, as stated by Richard Somerville in 2007, which indicates the 1 inch of ice cap melting highlighted in the article. However, it took until the late 1950s before the tracking of carbon dioxide levels began, which limits the article's explanation of climate change, as well as showing the reader the severity of it. Additionally, society's perspective on global warming was omitted, which limits our understanding of how climate change was viewed by the public of especially Brisbane. However, this article was written due to the lack of the data and perspective on climate change, as it was used to popularize the idea of Earth's warming, thus highlighting the stage of climate change action in Australian society in the 1950s. In relation to the current climate issues today, this article reveals how far society has come into accepting climate change as a real issue, and is also a key indicator of climate change for the 1950s, which correlates to Somerville's notion that newspapers are valuable sources of climatic reconstruction for the period before instrumental records became available. Therefore, this article is significant for the understanding of the history of climate change, leading to the progression of its study.